Hey, thanks for coming back to the channel today. Andrew here at BTO Range in Conroe, Texas. Today on the table, we're going back to the handguns. We've been doing quite a few long guns recently, so we're going to go back to the handguns. And we have the Ruger Security 6 double action revolver. This was a mainstay in the Ruger revolver line from 1972 until 1988. Was the production life of this little gun. So this particular revolver was made in 1979. And the Ruger stuff is generally fairly easily dated from the Ruger.com website. If you go to Ruger.com, the customer service tab, and there is a serial number lookup. This gun, the serial number doesn't pull on the lookup, but then there's a drop down feature where you can find the model of the gun, and it'll give you the table by year of when the serial number was manufactured. So this is a 1979 gun. So a little bit of the history of the Security 6. Ruger in the 60s, they had a few products in line. Of course, they had the gun that started it all for Ruger, the 22 semi-auto pistol. But they had some single action revolvers in line with the Black Hawk, Super Black Hawk. And they had some rifles in line with the number 1 and the number 3 rifle. So they wanted a double action revolver. So this gun was designed by Bill Ruger, had a part of it, but also a man by the name of Harry Seyfried, S-E-F-R-I-E-D, I think, S-E-F-R-I-E-D, I believe. And he had already had a long career before he came to Ruger, most notably with High Standard. He had a big part of most of the high standard semi-automatic pistols, as well as the Sentinel series of double action revolver, and that's kind of where this grip shape came from. If it looks familiar to those of you that have had or have handled the high standard Sentinel series revolvers, they're very similar to this grip frame shape that came into the Ruger Security 6 series guns. So he'd been at, Harry had been with High Standard, and then had been with Colt, and then he came to Ruger, and he had a pretty good series of gun designs attributed to him with Ruger as well. He had a big part of the 1022, for example, especially the magazine, the rotary magazine, the 1022, is pretty much attributable to Harry Seyfried. And there was a third guy by the name of Henry Into, I-N-T-O, and I don't have a ton of history on him. I know that, you know, he died back in the mid-90s in the villages in Florida, but as far as his production, what all he was involved with other than this series of revolvers, I'm not sure. I'm sure there were other stuff, it's just I haven't been able to come up with much on him. So if anybody out there has some information on that man, the last name is I-N-T-O, Henry Into, let us know. It's always good to learn more stuff about these guns. So the design work on this gun started about 1966. And the gun was officially announced in 1970 and started shipping in quantity around 1972. And this is a 1979 gun. So there were some not necessarily unique design features, because other companies like Charter Arms already had some of these design features in place, but what Ruger really hung their marketing hat on was the strength of the revolver. Now, just like anything else, Ruger, major components of this gun are investment cast. And we discussed this at length in the Ruger 77 video on our channel. So if you haven't seen that one, we do a pretty good discussion of the investment casting process that went into that rifle, and the investment casting was a big deal for Bill Ruger, so that's an integral part of this gun as well. But they did it with no side plate. For example, and we have the open cylinder here, so we know we're not loaded. So there's no side plate on this gun like you would see on a Smith & Wesson or Colt revolver. So the gun comes apart basically through the frame. This trigger guard component comes off this way. Obviously the grips come off, and then the hammer and everything comes up the top, and the cylinder comes out the front. So this is all solid. What you're looking at right here is the end of the hammer pin. The hammer pin goes through the hammer. and is indexed into a slot in the side of the frame like that. So Ruger made it, and the bolt here. Whoops, let's do it this way. The bolt here is larger and more substantial than some of the other gun models out there. So there's quite a few designs to improve the strength of the gun. One of the main things is Ruger was able to develop a means by not having the cylinder, the notch for the cylinder bolt directly over the actual chamber. That allowed there to be more actual metal in the chamber rather than having it cut away for that cylinder notch at what is ostensibly the thinnest part of the chamber. So all these were points in the design that Ruger used as marketing to make the claims that they were a strong design and try to reduce some of the fear about the gun being a cast gun. So that said, they were super popular. Over 1.5 million of these guns were produced in that 16-year run, 72 to 88. And they were produced in a few different versions. For example, in 1975, the gun was produced in stainless steel and a matte finish stainless steel. There were 3 different barrel lengths, or like a 2 3/4 or maybe 2.5, the 4-inch, which is what this gun is. And then you also see a longer gun in 6-inch. These service style stocks, eventually there was a larger target type stock version of this, and there's plenty of aftermarket stocks that were available for this frame made by Pockmeyer and Hogue, and just about everybody else that was making revolver grips at the time fitted this particular grip frame. In 1977, they developed a fixed sight version of the Security 6. It was still called the Security 6, and then maybe a year later, it was renamed the Speed 6. So the Ruger Speed 6 came about. Same gun, same basic action, same everything, except we started to get a round butt version. We had the 2 shorter barrel lengths, the 2 3/4 and the 4-inch. I believe there may have been a 3-inch as well, but we had the fixed sights there, and they call that the Speed 6 version. So around 78, 79, this barrel profile, Ruger called this a heavy barrel, was introduced. The earlier guns had a slightly lighter profile barrel. And in 357 Magnum, on a gun this size, it balanced well back here, but it didn't have a ton of weight up front. So there was quite a bit of muzzle flip in 357 Magnum on this gun, especially with the small grips. Also in 79, this grooved trigger here was replaced with a smooth face trigger. So this gun is a 79 serial number, probably early 79. And then at some point during that calendar year, those changes were phased in as parts were used up. So there are some interesting collectible variants of the Ruger Security 6. There were several government contracts, primarily U.S. State Department, for this gun. Whether or not they're military marked or U.S. government marked is variable. I have seen some that were U.S. government marked, but quite a few were not. There are also some different chamberings other than 38 Special 357 Magnum. Especially in the Speed 6, there were some chambered for 9mm. And then there were some overseas contracts for the gun, and you'll see this gun chambered in 38-200, or the 38 Smith & Wesson cartridge with a 200 grain bullet that was used by the UK. And I've read various articles about those guns, that they were for border, some type of guard in India. There were embassy guards. There were a few other things of that nature related to parts of the British Commonwealth chambered in the 38-200 British service cartridge. So there's not a ton. I mean, Ruger has never been as collectible as, say, Smith & Wesson or Colt, but it's really coming into its own now. There are a ton of Ruger collectors out there now, particularly with high condition boxed examples, or those rare or rarer low production examples, for example, the 9mm Speed 6 or this gun in 38-200 or any Marshall marked guns or U.S. property marked guns. So those are some things to watch out for when you are buying one of these old Ruger double action revolvers. Now, these guns went away in 1988 with the introduction of the GP100, which is the current Ruger double action revolver in line, or one of the current Ruger double action revolvers. I also have the SP101, the small frame, and then the Red Hawk and Super Red Hawk, the bigger 44 Magnum frame. So the GP100 is a larger frame. It's basically the size of a Smith & Wesson L frame, maybe just a touch bigger in certain areas. And this one is a little bit bigger than a K-frame Smith, particularly in the cylinder window area. So it fits, generally speaking, these Service 6s and Speed 6s fit into K-frame, Smith K-frame holsters. They're a little bit larger, but not so it won't fit snugly into a Smith & Wesson holster. So what are we looking for when we evaluate one of these guns? Well, as with any, let's move this thing out of the way. So we're going to watch the timing of the revolver. We're going to make sure that when the revolver is closed that we don't have a lot of movement here. A little bit of movement, you're going to have that, and that's simply a factor of the bolt moving in its corresponding notch in the cylinder. So obviously we don't want to be able to skip it past there, right? So we're going to slowly cock that hammer back, and we're going to make sure that that cylinder is clicking into place well before we're at the full cock. And I've actually got my hand, I'm allowing the cylinder to drag against my hand to make sure that, the cylinder hand pushes the cylinder all the way up into place. So in single action it times well, and then in double action it times really well also. And to be honest with you, these guns are so robust that having to retime one of these or replace that particular portion of a Ruger is not that common. It can happen. It can happen with any revolver, but it's just not that common with these guns. These are built really well. There's a coil spring mainspring in here, not a leaf spring like you would see on a Smith & Wesson or the old Colt Trooper or Colt Python revolvers. So it's all coil springs throughout. There's no leaf springs. That was another Ruger marketing thing back when this gun was new in the line. So it's really robust. Now the trade-off of that is it's harder to get a really nice trigger pull on one of these guns than with the corresponding Smith & Wesson or Colt product. It can be done. You can get a decent trigger pull on it, but these guns are known to stack the triggers fairly well, or quite a bit during the trigger pull, and there's just a ton of handwork to do to really smooth these guns out, but it can be done. But you gotta remember, that's not what the gun was designed for. The gun was designed to be a less expensive counterpart to the Smith & Wesson and Colt revolvers, and they were by several dollars when they came out. You could buy one of these for less than the corresponding Smith & Wesson or definitely the Colt product. Another thing to watch out for, or another thing that's substantially different, is the way the thumb piece is actuated on the Ruger revolver. The Smith & Wesson has a thumb piece that pushes forward. The Colt has a thumb piece that pulls back. The Ruger has a thumb piece that pushes in. So that pushes in to allow you to swing the cylinder out. So that thumb piece, there's a small screw that comes up from the underside of the recoil shield that indexes this guy here. So a lot of times is probably an overstatement, but people that shouldn't be trying to take these apart use a poorly fitted screwdriver and strip that screw out. So that can be problematic on these guns. So just when you're looking at one of these to buy, just take a quick look, make sure nobody's been messing with that screw there. There's really no need to take that out unless you have to replace the spring that's in there for whatever reason. Again, that's not a routine replacement part on one of these guns. So just like I think all of the Ruger products that were made in 1976, you'll find these revolvers marked with the 1976 barrel roll stamp. It'll say made in the 200th year of American liberty, roll stamped on the barrel of these guns. And that has become a popular Ruger collector subset are the 1976 guns. And they did it across all product lines. So you could get a Ruger 1 or a Ruger 3 or a Ruger 44 carbine or all the single action, every gun in their line. And that would make an interesting Ruger collection to get all the 1976 guns, particularly if you could get them in their boxes. Now, after that, Ruger unfortunately started putting all this verbiage somewhere on the gun about reading the instruction manual. Before using the gun, read the instruction manual. And it really makes for just a ton of roll stamp here on this barrel. And lately, Ruger's been, they still roll stamp all that stuff on there, but, or now it's lasered, I'm sure, but sometimes they'll, on the single actions, they'll hide it underneath by the ejector rod, but it's still there. To me, I mean, it doesn't affect, obviously, it doesn't affect the usability of the gun, but it just, the more stamping on the outside of the gun, to me, it kind of hurts the looks of the gun. So this gun, as you can see, is a carbon steel gun with a black oxide or blued finish. It has not turned that Ruger plum color. And again, we discussed that quite a bit in the Ruger 77 video. This is still a nice, deep factory blue. And you can tell that it's not been polished and blued. The telltale part about this is this Ruger emblem here on the side of the frame below the cylinder. It's almost impossible to polish that without rounding the edges or losing some of the detail on that emblem there. So that's a good spot to look, as well as looking to make sure that the lines are straight and all the stuff that you would normally look at to make sure a gun hasn't been polished. So also, when one of these guns is polished, you have to get the temperature right to make sure it doesn't turn that plum color during the reblue process. So the hammer and trigger on these guns were blued, and then the sides were polished out bright again, just like this one is. So this is a really high condition gun for 1979. Certainly that's, it's been around a minute. So we'd like to see that, a gun of this condition. It would have been in a yellow box in 70, yeah, it would have been in a yellow box in 79. And I wish we had that. That would help out quite a bit, the yellow box with the Ruger pamphlet in it and all that. This front sight blade is in a slot on the ramp, and there's a roll pin that holds that in. So this can be interchanged by driving that roll pin out, replacing the sight. Typically, you have to drill the new sight blade and replace this pin. It's kind of tricky because this is actually made finished flat with the gun. Well, I mean with the sides of the ramp. So adjustable, typical Ruger adjustable rear sight, the same type of rear sight used on the single action guns on these Security 6s. So there's a ton of aftermarket available for this from various sources. So as far as the three things that we always talk about when we talk about these older guns, the originality, the condition, and the scarcity, right? So 1.5 million of these guns, and this is probably the most common configuration right here, in either blue or stainless, the 357 Magnum by 4-inch gun. So the 2 3/4 gun is typically where the money's at in this gun, the shorter one. Just like in a Model 66 or a Model 19 Smith of this vintage, the money's in the 2.5-inch gun. And then the money would also be in the rarer guns, the 9mm Speed 6s, anything attributable to any kind of government usage, or the odd calibers like 38-200 is where the more expensive guns. Guns like this in this condition, you're typically still going to be sub $500 for that revolver, somewhere in the mid fours, and then a lot of times we see these with a ton of finish wear because they were designed to be utilitarian revolvers and they were used quite a bit. So we see a ton of finish wear on them. And then obviously you can get them down into the low 300s pretty easily from a retail standpoint. So they're affordable, but they're durable. I mean, with just a typical preventive maintenance, the gun will last forever and it will shoot from now on. So scarcity, not so much. The originality, we've talked about what to look for in the condition. We've talked about some of the, like for example, the screw on the bottom of the mag release is a typical part where there's an issue. So these are out there. They're kind of sleepers in the used gun world. If you find one, you know, somewhere collecting dust in the counter of your local gun shop or pawn shop somewhere it's worth trying to get, they'll run forever. So the Ruger Security 6, this one's 1979. We appreciate you coming to the channel and watching another episode with us. If you like what we're doing, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, drop us a comment. We look at them all. We respond to most of them that need a response. And if there's a maker model that you want us to take a look at, please drop that in the comments or let us know. And we'll try to find one and put it out there for you. Thanks again for watching and have a good day.